Hello, welcome to The Making of Madrid. My name's Felicity. I'm your presenter, a journalist and tour guide who's been living in the city for more than 11 years. Today's episode is about a barrio, or what we call neighbourhood, because people keep asking me all the time, what is the best barrio to stay in when I'm going to stay in Madrid? Of course, they say, what's the best neighbourhood? Because they might not know that word, barrio. And I thought I'd kick off with La Latina, because my answer is always, I guess, it depends. And so I thought what I would do is do a series of about all the different neighbourhoods, covering their pros and cons. I think for this one, it's only pros because I really love this one. I'm starting out with a firm favourite. And tell you a little bit about where you might stay, what you might eat, but also because I'm a massive history buff, and that's what I do on my guided tours of Madrid, is tell people about the history of the city. This one's going to cover the history of La Latina. And this is really fresh in my mind at the moment because I've just launched my brand new tour with Voice Map, so you can get me virtually taking you around La Latina. The tour is called Medieval Madrid, and it's a guide to Muslim Madrid, and it begins by the palace, but then you cross the viaduct and you go over into La Latina. So Madrid is the only European capital that was founded by a Muslim ruler. That's Mohammed I of Cordoba in the 9th century. And for a long time, it was a garrison town that protected Toledo to the south. It flourished because Madrid was full of groundwater, and the Muslim population stayed, and they stayed even after what's been called the Christian reconquest, and is rather debated in Madrid because Madrid actually was originally a Muslim settlement. But when Alfonso VI of Castile came and took the settlement of Madrid, the Muslim citizens stayed, but they moved outside the safety of the city walls. And this is why the topography of La Latina is interesting. So central Madrid has two hills that are bisected by this stream that runs down the Calle de Segovia. Now, Madrid, the name, comes from the fact that there was lots and lots of underground water in Madrid, and this stream gushed all the way down and created a crevice, creating these two hills. So the first hill where the palace stands was the original fortified Madrid, and then the other hill is where the Muslim citizens were forced to go and move out to an area called the Morería. And there are Morerias in cities all throughout Spain. There's one in Valencia as well. And this history is embedded in the names of the streets in La Latina, because you have Plaza de la Morería, you have Calle de la Morería, which I think also has Plaza de la Morería. And there's also Plaza de la Puerta de Morería, or de Moros, And that's where the new wall to the city stopped, where the gate to the Morería was, which is near the Museum of San Isidro, if you know it. And it eventually, of course, got this new wall, which all medieval towns kind of needed because medieval society was very violent. So Alfonso VI got all his Muslim citizens to come and stay and work for him, but they also worked on a wall that would protect them as well as Alfonso and all the Christians who were inside the former Madrid. Anyway, I won't go into too much detail about that because you can find out all about that on my tour of Muslim Madrid. So go to Voice Map. It's just out, and I'll be really excited to see what you will think of it if you are visiting the city. So there are two ways you can access the Morería, or what is now known as La Latina. And one of the ways is by going down from Plaza Mayor. When you get to the Plaza de Puerta Cerrada, you can go along what's known as the Cava Baja. Cava Baja also runs along the old route of that medieval wall. And it's full of late 19th century inns on which they did some excavations in the basements of these inns, and they all found traces of these Christian walls. And now it's sort of something that you will see if you go into one of what's called a posada, which is an old inn, the Posada del Dragón or the Posada León del Oro. They have segments of the old Christian wall underneath the floor with a sort of glass floor so you can look through. They're actually really, really nice in these old inns. Inside is something really interesting. There's a corrala. Now, they are lovely at Posada del Dragón. And sometimes they let me go in and show people the old corrala. And if you don't know what a corrala is, it's a good place to go and find out. You can also see one at the Museo de Artes y Tradiciones Populares in Lavapiés. They're sort of scattered around the city, but gradually disappearing. And they're a kind of architecture that dates back to sort of 16th century Madrid, but has its origins in Roman architecture. So it's a house built around a courtyard. And this really helps because during summer, when the summers get fiercely hot, you always have a little bit of shade. So working class houses were generally built around these courtyards, and people had their apartments on various levels, various balconies, but this also lent them to being great venues for the theatre. So the first theatres in Madrid were actually called corralas as well, because the first plays were shown in places where people lived, and then they opened like the Corrala del Príncipe, which was the first theatre in Madrid. Anyway, you can go inside this wonderful old 19th century inn and have a meal in the corrala because it can be covered. I think they've got a glass roof on it now. It's not totally open to the elements, but I had a meal there a few years ago with a friend and it was absolutely fantastic. And now we get to beginning to touch a little bit on the foodie side of La Latina, because La Latina is an absolutely banging place to go out for a meal and have a lot of fun if you're around my age. So it's used to be the place where all the jóvenes, the young people of Madrid, went to. But then Malasaña started to become much more desirable, and all the young people decamped to Malasaña. And so La Latina went sort of slightly upmarket. And now if you go out of an evening, you'll notice that a lot of people are sort of a little bit better dressed, a little bit worn around the edges, perhaps. And they're all having a blast out in La Latina. And maybe you would start out along Cava Baja, because this is really the buzzing part of the area, the old transport hub. So if you visit themakingofmadrid.com, little plug there, you can see a whole article about Cava Baja and its history as a transport hub. There are quotes from Arturo Barea's memoir about his memories of Cava Baja as a small child, when people would come in, this is early 20th century, coming into town to go to the market, which is at the end of the road, which is the Mercado de Cebada. Now, the market is no longer, of course, an open-air market. It's one of many closed markets, municipal markets that were built in Madrid. And when I first got here, these were rather dusty places. Most of the shops were shut down. I thought they were a bit creepy, and I kind of missed the open-air markets of London. But if you think about it, when you have a market in really, really hot, blistering summer heat in Madrid, that's going to be terribly difficult for the people working there to keep their produce fresh. So these modern, well, I say modern, but it's sort of 60s, 70s type building. These more modern market buildings are really fantastic. They actually replaced beautiful old late 19th century glass and iron markets that sort of copied Les Halles. And there was one on Mercado de Cebada, but they had to be destroyed because the heat, you've got glass and iron, it's just a recipe for disaster. And they're also really hard to maintain, these kind of buildings, because very sadly, the Palacio de Cristal, which is one of the last remaining structures of its kind, I think, in the world. It's very similar to what was the Crystal Palace out in London, which no longer exists. So the Palacio de Cristal in Retiro is another of these glass and iron structures, beautiful curved roofs that were a real feat of engineering of its time, but it's under so much stress that they've had to just totally batten the hatches. They're doing a lot of work on sort of fixing that building because the iron rusts. It's so hard to maintain a building like that, but really marvelous that they are now because, of course, you know, this is part of the reason why Retiro, the whole area, got made a UNESCO heritage site. Anyway, we've gone off on a tangent because we were in the Mercado de Cebada, and we can get back to talking about food. And this place is really, really popular because they do amazing seafood on the weekends. And from about 12 o'clock, I guess maybe 11:30 onwards, people come to have a fresh seafood feast. There are fishmongers in the basement part, and they sell you, I don't know, you can get a polystyrene tray of prawns. It's really rough and ready. Or maybe something quite expensive like percebes, which are barnacles, which are considered a delicacy here in Madrid. But usually people go, you know, for the cheaper eats, but lovely fresh seafood. And there's crates everywhere, and you buy a beer and your polystyrene thing of seafood, and you sit on a crate and you have your sort of aperitivo, which is your aperitif with friends. And then, of course, you can have a much later lunch if you fancy, or perhaps that will be enough for lunch. But that's one of the most famous things about the Mercado de Cebada, the market of Cebada. It's also full of other interesting, cool little stores and art shops, and all these markets really sort of flourished back into life in recent years because the municipal councils have realized that they can't get by on grocers, fishmongers, butchers alone. They had to become sort of places where people could hang out and have a drink. And yeah, in summer, in fact, I love them because now I appreciate the covered market. If you are just totally feeling worn out from the heat, you can go into these municipal markets and cool down. They're always air conditioned, and it just feels marvelous because you're sort of strolling around. You have a little bit of freedom as if you were out on the street, and there's so much to see. There's a really lively, lovely atmosphere. A little bit of a dark history to this square, in fact, though, because it used to be the place where public executions took place. And very famously, Luis Candelas, Madrid's terrible, handsome, rogue thief who was notorious in the 19th century, was killed by garrote in this very square. Anyway, moving on, I guess I should tell you a little bit about things to see in La Latina. And there's so much. When you cross over the other way, so you can get directly from the cathedral, you can cross over directly and not even go down the hill, because there's a massive viaduct that's very, very high. And crossing over that viaduct takes you directly in, so it's bridging those two hills. Unfortunately, the drop is so steep that it became a notorious suicide spot in Madrid until they put up a plexiglass barrier. But going across that road on foot, it's a big main road, but you have these spectacular views where you can see out to the mountains and imagine why Madrid was this great kind of place tactically, because you can view any enemy coming from the north. If they get past the mountains, you've got a clear view out to there. And you also have a lovely clear view out towards the cathedral and the palace and the Casa de Campo from the other side of the viaduct. So there's a little park just there, and it's an amazing place to take the views. It's right by the Jardín de Vistillas, the Garden of Views, which is where the Fiestas de San Isidro take place. It's a big steep park that sort of plunges down into that Calle de Segovia that used to be the stream. But not going that way, instead continue along the main road, you get to perhaps, I think, Madrid's most spectacular church. And that is the Basilica de San Francisco el Grande. And it's the second largest cupola in Europe. It's beautiful indoors because I think they started making it around the 18th century, but, more recent work was done in the 19th century, and I actually love it because it's real romantic painters. But there's also a chapel done by Goya. You can spot Goya himself in a rare Hitchcockian moment where he puts himself in the painting. It's wonderful. Go in and see it. You might have to pay, but absolutely worth the price. Going back up another main road, you then come to the Museo de San Isidro, which is totally free, incredible, and 100% worth going in to see. Now there, you'll not only learn a lot about Muslim Madrid, because when they actually built that museum, they found a little door which was a replica of the door to the old Moorish quarter. But it's just fantastic. But you'll find all this stuff, a lot of stuff about Saint Isidro, who lived around the time that Alfonso VI took Madrid. So we think around the end of the 11th century, early 12th century. So supposedly his magical well. And you'll also find the grave of La Latina, who gave her name to the area. So the area went from being the Morería until eventually the Muslims were so persecuted that La Latina, not Lala, it wasn't her fault, La Latina. Eventually, most people converted to Christianity or moved elsewhere, and it became a very Christian place. And in medieval times, but this is sort of late medieval, during the rule of Isabella and Ferdinand, La Latina came to live here, and she was very connected to the royal court. She was a girl genius who was amazing at Latin from a very early age and attended Salamanca University, which was totally a sausage fest at the time, if you can imagine. And she was actually destined to become a nun, because what could you do if you were an incredibly intelligent woman and wanted to study? The best thing you could do was become a nun, so you could study literature, the scriptures or languages or whatever within the safety of a convent and not have to sort of waste your time with childbearing or whatever. But that wasn't going to be the fate of La Latina, because Queen Isabella found out about this female genius, and she asked her to teach her children. So she taught all the girls that Isabella had. Among them is Catherine of Aragon and Juana the Mad. Now, both of them would rise to positions of incredible power. So Catherine of Aragon became Queen of England while she was regent, while Henry VIII was out off fighting. He did initially love her, by the way, but of course then she had this terrible fate that he sort of kicked her to the curb because she didn't give him a male heir. And Juana the Mad was deemed mad by her father because she actually inherited her mother's kingdom, and he wanted a bit of that. So locked away she was, poor old Juana the Mad. But La Latina herself had a nicer fate. Isabella was very pleased with her, and she married her off to an incredibly rich guy whose name escapes me, but if you read my article on the making of Madrid about La Latina, you can find it. But he was a rich guy anyway. And he conveniently died, leaving her incredibly rich. And she then proceeded to found a hospital in the area of Madrid, which was really a town at the time. And the area began to be known not as the Morería, but as La Latina. And shortly after that, in 1561, then you have Madrid becoming ultimately the capital of Spain because Philip II decides to settle his court here. And that's another interesting thing to see in La Latina is the Casa a la Malicia on, I think, number 10 Calle La Redondilla. And it's painted pink with these large bricks. But if you look at the building, you'll notice something a little bit odd, because all windows are in strange positions. And the reason for this is because when Philip suddenly landed the court in Madrid, there wasn't enough accommodation for everybody. So he issued a law saying that anyone in Madrid actually had to give up a room in their house to a noble person. So people began building these houses called Casas a la Malicia, or trick houses. So it was really difficult for the tax inspectors who decided all this to work out how much spare accommodation they had. And therefore they would sort of it was a little dodge, a way of getting out of putting up nobility that you didn't really want in your area. Other lovely things to see in La Latina is the Plaza de la Paja, which, if you know any Spanish, can have a rude double meaning. Oop, my cat just sneezed then. But the Plaza de la Paja actually refers to straw. And this is because people used to bring a portion of their harvest, their straw that they harvested, to the bishop to feed his stables. So this was sort of a tax that they had to pay to the church. Of course, then and now, immensely wealthy. But now Plaza de la Paja, of course, doesn't have this sort of rural tradition anymore. But it's beautiful and absolutely magical. In a video I made just a little while ago about hidden Madrid, you can see the little Jardín del Príncipe de Anglona hidden at the bottom of Plaza de la Paja. But the square itself is amazing. And one of my favorite places on that square is La Musa, where you can go and have breakfast out on the square. They do a great croissant and café con leche. They're also great in the evening as well. And I just have to give a shout out to the most beautiful toilets in Madrid. They're just tiled. I don't know what it is. They've really pulled out all the stops for these toilets. It's just spectacular. You have to go. We're a bit toilet challenged in Madrid. I have a whole blog post, a bit of a rant about toilets. So I'm always delightfully surprised when there's a wonderful toilet. Anyway, I think that about covers my roundup. If I've forgotten anything, I'll put it in my blog post. But the very last thing I think I'd like to say is it's just fun to go out drinking there. So maybe drinking in the day, if that's what you enjoy, just, the odd glass or two out on the Plaza de la Paja, or in the evening when the light goes down and it's beautiful. And also big shout out to Taberna Tempranillo, which is another place I like to go to. It's a beautiful old wine bar. There's a whole wall just covered in bottles of wine. And they are particularly interesting for two reasons. One is that they do provide a lot of wines from the Comunidad de Madrid, which, if you didn't know, is a wider area that encompasses a lot of kind of quite remote countryside. Oh no, my cat's having a problem now. The beautiful wine from the Comunidad de Madrid, and they give you really brilliant tapas. So the tapas comes free even. And when I went the last time, they gave me like a free partridge tapa, which just is incredible. And I like the atmosphere in there. It's really low key and grown up, which I really think kind of sums up the ambience of La Latina for me. Because if you want to find a place to stay in Madrid and you're around my age range, so sort of middle-aged and not wanting to party all the time, then go stay in La Latina, because it's this charming area with a lot of deep medieval history, quiet corners, beautiful, and of course you can stay in these lovely old inns, the posadas. So the Posada de Dragón, the Posada León del Oro, they're lovely and just drenched in history. So that brings me to the end of this podcast about La Latina. Let me say again, if you are enjoying the podcast, please drop me a like or a review. Do visit my website, themakingofmadrid.com. And if you'd like to support what I do, perhaps think about buying my book, which is called Quiet Madrid. It's all about the tranquil spaces and hidden places in the city that you can take a breather in. It's a good companion to the Lonely Planet guidebook that I worked on already. And you're giving the money directly to me, of course. But the other thing is you can hire me as a guide, or you can hire me virtually as a guide. I've got now 3 tours out on VoiceMap. The latest one is Medieval Madrid, which is basically a guide to Muslim Madrid. And the other 2 tours I have are one of Retiro and one of Barrio de las Letras. And thank you so much for watching or listening